I'm seated on a stone patio outside a private dining room at a members-only club, my hands cool against a glass that fogs in the air. Laughter and the clink of crystal drift out like something from a different life. It's my father's birthday dinner. They've placed me by the heater and the service door, the obvious choice when you want someone out of photos and out of power. Then the lawn fills with noise, a helicopter touching down, rotors whipping napkins, and the scent of cut grass into the room. My security chief, Caleb Morgan, strides up and sets a leather folder in front of me. "We need your signature before markets open," he says. Through the glass I watch Luke stop mid-toast, Vanessa's smile falter, Mom pinch the bridge of her nose, and Dad grip his chair as if steadying a ship. I sign at the tab, close the folder, and tell them I'm done being seated outside. The patio stops being exile and becomes the center of the room. Before I tell you everything that led to this and how I turned a family exile into a takeover, tell me where you're listening from in the comments. Subscribe and switch on notifications if you want more first-person family revenge stories. There are more like this coming. I am Ava Mercer. I'm 32, and I built Helios Dynamics from long nights and tighter budgets into a company people call a quiet powerhouse. Publicly, I'm the engineer who keeps her head down. Privately, I'm the chief executive officer who signs the last page. My day starts before sunrise, an inbox sweep, markets check, then a run to clear my head. I don't take meetings before 10 because I need a block of deep, uninterrupted time to think. I started in a tiny studio apartment with cables across the floor, then moved to a rented warehouse where we soldered prototypes on folding tables. Now we have a glass floor I rarely show on camera and a product that tends to speak louder than any speech I could give. I keep my name off the puff pieces and send other faces to panels. That's deliberate. I learned early that attention is a currency that spends fast and attracts predators. Every major decision passes through me. I read the memos, I approve the hires, I sign the checks, but I give the spotlight to others. It keeps rivals guessing and my family uninterested, which was useful more than once. Caleb Morgan, my security chief, runs a small, efficient team. No flash, no ego, just people who show up and get things done. Quiet has become my armor. I wear it like a coat I can button up against noise. To my family, I'm the one with the little computer thing. That phrase is never mean in its delivery, more of a hand wave that says, she's useful when we need her, but not the sort of person you sit next to for photos. Luke loves a camera and a speech. Vanessa curates her life like it's a glossy magazine. They expect me to sit straight, smile small, and disappear when the flash goes off. At club dinners, I'm placed by the doors or on the patio for the view, which is their polite language for stay out of frame. Holidays gesture toward me with, "Next year you'll be more involved, Ava," which sounds like a promise and a stay of judgment. Mom has a particular way of saying, "Be reasonable," that always means keep the peace and save us from the spectacle of your truth. She wants family look, not family rectified. Dad measures loyalty with a slow, calibrating eye. He treats the brand of the family as larger than the people in it. To them, a face at the center is the point. To me, a functioning payroll, a warmed office, a pension that won't vanish, those are the points. They don't see it as glamour. They see it as utility, and because I don't crave applause, they never learn to respect the work behind it. My life runs on 2 calendars and 2 phones. By day, I keep the public one: interviews, board calls, partner meetings. After hours, there's the other phone where I schedule the real work. Emergency wires, late-night debugging, calls with partners who need blunt answers. Sienna Park, my head of communications, runs decoys when we need them, ghost accounts and staggered posts that keep competitors guessing without giving away our moves. Tariq Patel, my chief financial officer, watches the numbers like a hawk. He texts if anything twitches and I move. Caleb staggers routes and screens my meetings, 3 rings for yes, 2 for wait, 1 for not today. Elena Wu, my closest engineer, meets me on rooftops on purpose. We sketch on paper so there's no trail for someone to find in a server. We talk in simple sentences about what the next product has to do. I keep a small wooden box on my desk with my grandmother's handwriting inside. Before any big move, I open it. There's something about laying her paper in my palm that slows my breath and sharpens my focus. I don't like chaos. I prefer the kind of preparation that lets you move while others panic. That box helps me remember the shape of the life I want to leave behind, the one that runs no matter who gets the applause. Ruth Mercer left me a stack of cards tied with an old rubber band. The top one reads in her slanted ink, "Build for storms, not sunshine." She wrote it in a way that made the letters tilt like someone warning you to watch your step. Ruth taught me that people will see you only when they need you. She told me to build anyway and keep the deeds to myself. Another card says, "Quiet is not weakness, it's a bank." That line has kept me anchored on nights when the noise outside wanted to drown out what I do. She argued that silence could compound into something solid and useful if you fed it right. There's a note, corners softened, that says, "Flattery spends fast." Ruth warned me to beware of people who compliment in cashmere and expect service in return. I learned to prefer hard proof to sweet talk, ledgers over toasts, receipts over applause. When I'm unsure, I lay the cards on the desk and watch which one makes my chest feel lighter. If the note about storms snaps my attention tight, it's the one I pick. If the one about quiet settles my shoulders, I carry it like a compass. She also left a small, practical line, "Protect who shows up." That's Ruth's morality in 3 words. It's why I'd rather a safe payroll than a family speech. She taught me to measure loyalty by action, not by who wears the ring or says the right words at the table. I keep that rule carved into the back of my notebook and on the top of my list when choices narrow. When people say that revenge is about anger, Ruth's cards remind me that real revenge is about making sure cruelty can't be reused against the people who depend on you. That kind of revenge doesn't flare, it settles. It's about leaving things better than you found them, and sometimes that means signing papers on a lawn while a helicopter turns the lights bright and the room goes quiet. But behind the brochure, things are taped together. The back office smells like dust and printer toner. Files sit in boxes that look like they've been moved 3 times and never unpacked. The coffee maker leaks. Staff swap paper notes to remind each other about payments because the accounting software is a rickety bridge no one wants to cross at night. Dad insists the company is stronger than ever, and he says it in a voice that fills the room. I can hear the confidence in the tone, but I also hear the pauses where it fails to land. When the CFO speaks, her sentences trail into silence. She looks away at the end like she's left something unsaid. People find me in hallways. A manager pulls me aside and says, "If you can mention it," and I don't need the rest. The receptionist, whose vacation I once approved, returns from the copy machine with a face that looks smaller, and later I learn she's canceled the trip because she can't risk a missed paycheck. Employees hand me little confessions. Overdue rent notices, heating systems out in a building no one's fixed, vendors whispering about missed invoices. I'm not on the Mercer org chart in name, but I pay attention in practice. When the people who keep the lights on look tired, I ask why. That's when they tell me about the cracks. The night before the storm, the calendar felt like a taut string. It was Dad's 68th birthday, the kind of dinner that should be all speeches and the slow release of candles. It was also the same night our biggest corporate move was due to close, an acquisition that had to be signed before markets opened in Asia. I could have sent someone to sign for me. I could have bent to the small humiliations my family choreographed, sat by the heater and smiled when pictures were taken. I decided not to. I was told my seat would be on the patio for some fresh air, which is family code for out of frame. I booked myself into the corner intentionally. Caleb had a play mapped out. A primary landing spot for the helicopter on the lawn, 2 alternates, a ground route if the weather turned, and a backup that got called Plan C and kept in his folder. Sienna had drafted 2 versions of a press line, one if the deal closed quietly, one if the world shifted and we had to speak. Tariq had alarms set, simple messages that would pop up if anything in our accounts moved the wrong way. I slid Ruth's top card across my keyboard before I left, the one that said, "Build for storms, not sunshine." I tucked my fountain pen into my bag like a weapon. I slept for 3 hours that night and woke sharp. There was no sense of looming disaster so much as the feeling that a moment had arrived where I would finally have to stop being a footnote. Disturbance wasn't coming, I was bringing it. I got the text late. Jules Benton, the family firm's controller, the kind of woman who never uses exclamation points, wrote, "Payroll we might miss." No emojis, no softening punctuation. That kind of text is an alarm that sits in your chest like a stone. I called her. She sent numbers and screenshots. Vendor payments were stacked like dominoes waiting for the nudge that would send them all toppling. A property tax notice sat unpaid on someone's desk. A cleaning crew had spoken about walking if they didn't see payment. The receptionist's canceled vacation was a symptom. The deeper problem was a rhythm that had stopped. I went to the office after hours. The lights were on in a few offices, the kind of glow that says people are trying to keep things upright. There was dust on boxes that should have been opened months ago, sticky notes like bandages on a wound. Call vendor, confirm invoice, do not promise. The silence in the corridors had a hum of bad math to it. Numbers were shuffled into corners and given polite names so no one asked too many questions. Jules told me she'd been instructed to keep certain details between departments, and that phrase meant someone was hiding things. When I asked who knew, she looked at me with tired eyes and said, "Not the right people." I heard the warning in her voice, "Don't pull the thread that could bring down the curtain." I told her, "Tonight it's me." I felt no drama in that sentence, just the economy of someone making a choice. If paychecks were going to fail, I wasn't going to be the one to watch people lose their homes while a family brand stayed pretty. That's not a speech, it's a decision. I pulled open their numbers like a map and started drawing lines. What's owed, what's due, what we promised that we can't keep without help. Luke's talk of growth looked different on paper. It was a staircase built on boxes, short-term loans rolled into more short-term loans, deals that pushed real payments down the road until they crowded each other. Revenue claims in the monthly report didn't line up with the deposits in the accounts, figures had been rounded up, and occupancy numbers were padded by letters of intent that had never become real leases. It wasn't sloppy bookkeeping. It was storytelling. I made a list and wrote names and dates and amounts in a notebook I never left at the office. I underlined things so I'd see them in the dark: vendor names, payroll dates, the pension line. I found entries that would have read like miracles at the annual dinner and were, in reality, thin stitches holding a coat together. This wasn't a dip in cash flow, it was a cliff behind a velvet curtain. Once you step back and see the cliff, you don't stand still, you plan a way to keep people from falling. The worst cut was that the employee pension had been pledged to secure a loan. I read it twice because it felt like a sentence written in someone else's voice. Dad, who always thought a signature meant loyalty and legacy, had let that happen. The pension people's retirement money, the thing some of them counted on after long careers, was collateral on a deal that depended more on pride than prudence. If one more payment missed, the bank could call the loan and go after the fund first. I pictured the receptionist who had canceled her trip, the building manager who'd texted about unpaid maintenance, the cleaning crew threatening to strike. I drew a new line in my notebook: protect the pension at all costs. I called Tariq and said simply, "We need a rescue plan." He listened, quiet and efficient as always, and replied, "We can do it. We have to do it quietly." Quiet in our language meant no tabloids, no family speeches, no staged apologies. It meant moving money, setting up a separate path, and keeping eyes off the mechanics so no one could weaponize the rescue. Quiet wouldn't get me applause, but it would keep people paid. My rule locked in right then: protect the workers. The rest, the titles, the photos, the speeches, could burn if that's what it took. I put my fountain pen on the corner of the notebook and felt Ruth's card under my palm, that small, steady instruction about storms. I was going to answer this one the way she taught me, with preparation, not noise. I told only a handful of people what was happening. Jules Benton needed to know enough to stop the bleeding, payroll must clear, vendors must be told they would receive checks. I said to her plainly, "Payroll will clear Friday." Keep your head down. She's the kind of person who prefers to be told what to do so she can, when necessary, do it well. Leela Tran, a broker who owed me a favor from a past deal, moved the title documents through channels with the sort of small, efficient gestures that fit her. A coffee, a hand signature, a stamped envelope. We kept language boiled down to essentials, no colorful wording that someone could twist into a headline. I put a deadline on it for myself. 2 weeks to close, faster if anyone forced my hand. That deadline gave me focus, a metronome to keep fast when panic wanted to scatter us. Sienna drafted a minimal public statement nobody would use unless forced. New ownership brings operational stability. Simple, clean, no family drama. Caleb set up the logistics: 3 routes into the city, a helicopter window, a ground plan that included a specific lawn on the club because timing mattered and things would change if we let them. I tucked Ruth's card into my notebook and felt the weight of it against my thumb. I wasn't asking permission, I was doing what had to be done. The timer was 2 separate but linked clocks. One was Helios's acquisition, an $8 billion move, a thing that would change our field if it closed as planned. That clock was unforgiving, a narrow window before Asian markets opened, 2 minutes missed and the price could climb or the deal could unravel. The other clock was the family firm's payroll and pension. If I missed one and failed the other, people would lose more than a title, they'd lose paychecks and retirement plans. The meeting that would sign one had to land inside the other. That's why I put the whole operation on a schedule that looked ridiculous if you didn't live in this work. A dinner for a birthday, a helicopter on the lawn, and a pen that would cross a final page before a market bell. Sienna said, "If something breaks, we go public on our terms." I replied, "Then let's own the script." Caleb texted a terse, "Be ready to land on grass." Omar, my pilot, confirmed fuel in a 2-minute window and told me to be ready for a go-no-go call. Tarek scheduled a paper release for the acquisition that required my signature in ink, no electronic shortcuts. There was a security in that archaic formality. It meant I had to be present. I slid Ruth's card into my bag again, billed for storms, not sunshine, and felt oddly calm. The world would be noisy, but if I stuck to the specifics, noise doesn't change numbers. I built the cover like a small machine with each piece serving a function. A website that looked like any small property company's, a postbox at a quiet address, accounts with a credible history so transfers wouldn't cause flags. Leela was careful: no one from the Mercer circle on her emails, no obvious phone numbers. We even set up a simple voicemail greeting that sounded like a sleepy regional office rather than a power play. I wanted Brightline Harbor to be a hand that could be erased once the people who relied on the family firm were safe. I listed what I needed in plain sentences. Step 1, clear payroll. Step 2, secure vendor contracts for 90 days so no one walks. Step 3, stop new loans, roll what we must into a steadier shape. Step 4, protect the pension. I scheduled Jules to text me nightly totals by 9 and a fuller weekend summary by Sunday noon. I told her to destroy any printed notes that could drift into the wrong hands. Tarek arranged for a sweep of funds that would move quickly from Helios reserves to Brightline's account under a simple heading, operational support, so that bank clerks saw routine language, not an emergency. At a small breakfast place off the avenue, Daniel Brooks met me without a fanfare. He's the kind of bank executive who always orders black coffee and doesn't waste time on small talk. I slid the notebook across the table and said, "I'm buying the firm." He looked at me for a long beat, then asked, "Are you prepared for fallout?" I told him, prepared and resourced. That was true. I showed him clear pages of what would happen if payroll failed and what it would mean if the pension were accessed by a lender. He wanted proof of funds, nothing fancy, just a letter that said money was available and not contingent on a dozen approvals. Tarek provided it that day, 3 sentences that said Helios had the resources to steady this situation. Daniel listened and then said the thing you always hope a banker won't have to say. "If there's fraud, I have to act." I looked at him and said, "So do I," he nodded, and that was the tacit agreement we needed. He agreed to a temporary hold on aggressive moves against the family firm if I hit our milestones within 10 business days. That hold was the breathing room I needed. It meant I could go in, steady the operation, and give the staff a sense that their paychecks weren't going to stop because someone wanted a headline. It also meant I had to be precise. No lip service, no dramatic posts, just steady hands. Then came the first practical stabilizing moves. I wired money through Brightline Harbor's account to cover payroll and told Jules to make the transaction look routine. Payroll processing in the memo line, zero fanfare. She sent me a thumbs-up emoji that night, and I imagined the relief in the reception area when the lights didn't go dark on payday. A vendor meeting was scheduled for 7 in the morning. I took the call through a voice filter and spoke in a neutral, steady voice. We're extending current terms for 90 days, expect payment on schedule. They asked no questions, they wanted one thing: money that came on time. I extended the cleaning and security contracts for 90 days at fair rates. It cost more in the short term, but crews showing up is worth every cent. A building manager texted Jules at 2 in the morning. Whoever is behind this, thank you. That message landed the way a small kindness does when someone's been leaning too long. I cut non-critical spend across the firm. No glossy brochures, no vanity events, no expensive lighting that didn't affect tenants. Those tiny luxuries were the first to go because they didn't keep a night watchman paid or the heating system running. I told Jules to tell any curious vendor that new ownership had stepped in and they should expect the usual payments. The phrase "new ownership is bland," and that was the point. Bland doesn't sell papers. It reassures people who want facts, not drama. I watched the first payroll clear from my desk and felt a low relief that isn't the sort of thing you can explain to someone who hasn't stayed up worrying about other people's rent. It's simple: when the lights keep going on and the cleaners keep coming, people breathe. And sometimes breathing is victory enough. I answered as plainly as I could. Mom, titles don't keep lights on. Paychecks do. That line landed in the silence for a second, then a rustle of a napkin. She said, you have to think of the family of appearances. When people say appearances, they mean control. They mean the story others will tell about us. I told her, I'm thinking about the people who show up every day and expect to be paid at the end of the month. That's what counts. She wanted me to see it as betrayal. I saw it as duty. She begged me to be gentle with Luke, to consider his feelings. I told her I was protecting the staff, not seeking revenge for applause. She got quiet, and when she spoke again, the small voice had hardened into fear. You don't have to make it worse, Ava, I said. I won't, I'll just stop the bleeding. She didn't like the phrase, but it was the truth. Vanessa's message arrived as a curated thumbnail. A series of lipstick-smiled selfies and a caption idea about humanizing me. She wanted a stylist, a staged profile, a makeover that would smooth over whatever awkwardness this would cause at the dinner. Her notifications pinged in a pattern she trusted: publicity first, questions later. I declined her offer, short and careful. I'm not for sale. She sent a thumbs up and a calendar invite titled Brand. Ava, I left it sitting in the invite list like a bookmark I wasn't interested in opening. The family kept pushing me toward the cover story: keep Ava pretty and quiet, keep the legacy intact. I'd been playing that role for years. The difference now was that I wouldn't let it cost other people their lives. Claire Sutton, the board member I'd trusted once, started asking for extra documents about the acquisition, details no one else was requesting. Her tone in emails had this professional calm that pretended to be helpful but was, in reality, probing. When someone asks for extra papers at odd hours, you listen. I flagged it to Sienna and Tarek. Treat Claire like press. Say less. Sienna went quieter than usual, forwarding Claire only what she absolutely had to, and Tarek started routing sensitive notes through tighter channels. Caleb ran a soft check and found Claire had been on calls with a number that traced back to Victor Lang's office more than once. Victor Lang was that kind of rival who wore a smile like a blade, offered to shake your hand, and then offered you rumors about your future. Victor started calling our partners with a friendly-sounding warning. If you don't want uncertainty, you might consider other options. He whispered doubt into ears and watched the ripples. Reporters began asking Sienna questions that smelled precise, the kind of inside questions that suggested someone had a map. We answered accurately but gave nothing extra. That's an art. Say enough to stop gossip without handing anyone a sword. A supplier asked for shortened payment terms like they were testing the waters to see how long we'd keep paying. It's a small thing, an adjustment here, a delayed invoice there, but it shows the pressure is working. Victor mixed threats with charm, and people who like to hedge their bets began to ask to be paid earlier. Claire called for a board review of the deal's timing, which is how they dress a coup in polite words. I pushed back and insisted on timelines. I refused to let a whisper become a rule. Then the leak started, and it moved faster than I expected. Megan Cole, a gossip blogger who runs a site where nothing is ever entirely true but some things hurt, posted a short piece. Is Helios stretched thin? It was the sort of thinly sourced headline that can make a market wobble if people read it aloud. The post included a number, one of those numbers you only see when you've been in too many late-month meetings. That figure had been in a memo. A tiny circle had read me, Tarek, Sienna, Claire, and Luke. I read Megan's piece and my stomach dropped because the number matched a specific draft I'd sent as a test. Who had access to that draft? I ran it through my head like a mental audit. Who, when, where? I circled the list of people who'd seen the memo. Claire had been in recent contact with a consultant I'd never met. Luke had been odd in his messages lately, too interested in minute details, and I remembered his offhand joke at dinner about inside scoops. I texted Sienna, who else had that file? She answered with a screenshot of access logs and highlighted one curious entry. My phone buzzed with an alert from Caleb. He'd seen Megan's car in a parking lot near Luke's building the day before, the same model Luke had just leased. It wasn't a proof in itself, but it made the pattern feel heavier. I could see two possible culprits, one inside the board and one inside the family. One was corporate. One was personal, both could hurt us. There was no point in flailing. I set a trap instead of shouting into the wind. I created versions of the sensitive memo, 3 small variants, each with a slightly different phrasing and number. I sent one to Claire with a phrase that would identify her if it leaked, one to Luke with a slightly altered figure, and I kept the master copy with Tarek. It felt petty and precise, the kind of thing Ruth would have smiled at because it's the sort of quiet preparation she loved. You don't call people out with fireworks when you can illuminate them with a single, undeniable light. The problem was the leak itself had already shifted mood in the company. People were bracing for impact. I had to make sure when things broke, they broke in my hands. Luke posted a video that night, him halting by a marble column, voice steady with staged emotion, about attacks on the family legacy, about being resilient and proud and misunderstood. He had that practiced look, the right light, the right cadence, the right pause. People leaned in. Vendors asked, "Who do we trust?" And I answered the only way that mattered, by being the one who moved money where it needed to go. Mom texted me in the middle of the back and forth, "Remember his feelings." That line always smells like pressure to keep the choreography of the family intact. I replied, "I'm protecting paychecks, not egos." She didn't like it, but she put her phone down and let the thought sit. Rumor turned toward reality faster than I wanted. Megan Cole posted a second piece with another leaked number, a figure pulled from a different draft, a detail that had been seen by only a tiny circle. The market wobbled. Our team felt it in the slackening of replies and the sudden surge of "Are you sure?" messages. Alina pinged me, "We're still a go, right?" I answered, "Yes." It was true, we were a go, but our margin for error shrank. People outside us could smell the small dampness of worry and began testing to see if it would grow into rain. Sienna drafted a factual thread, short sentences, plain facts, no flourish. We posted it and watched the internet shrug and move on, which is sometimes the best thing a company can ask for. Caleb sent me a photo, Megan's car in a parking lot near Luke's building the day before, the same model he'd just leased. It wasn't proof on its own, it was pattern. Patterns stack until they become a picture you can't ignore. I started to feel the trap closing in from two directions, one hand on the family, one on the company. The party that was meant to be Dad's night, the night the room was supposed to be all candles and perfect speeches, suddenly felt like a potential courtroom. Mom called to finalize the seating. Dad center, Luke to his right, Vanessa to his left, Ava by the doors for fresh air. The phrasing was a careful euphemism. They meant keep Ava out of the picture. Vanessa messaged with a plan to soften me. A stylist, new photos, a public makeover that would smooth everything over. I declined. I wasn't interested in a costume change to make people comfortable. Dad's assistant left a note on my phone with a plea. No business talk at the table. The implication was clear. This should be family time, a wall against the work. I smiled and tucked that note into a message to Sienna. This will be family time until it isn't. I placed Ruth's top card under my napkin before I left. It made my movements feel ritualized, like a soldier checking his gear. I texted Caleb, if anything land. He replied, 2 minutes window. I listened to the small gear noise of the plan. Timing matters, timing is everything. If the party could be used to humiliate me, it could also be the moment I decided where I chose to sit. Options narrowed like a corridor with doors that led to bad outcomes. Pause the acquisition and Victor wins. Go public on Luke and risk wrecking Dad, lose him to shame or to a slow, private death of dignity. Stall and hope things mend themselves, which is another way of saying doing nothing and watching people get hurt. I kept thinking about the receptionist who had canceled her trip, about the building manager who texted at 2 a.m. and wanted someone to show up. That's the bottom line. I could humiliate Luke in public and satisfy a need for spectacle, or I could be surgical and save the people who depend on us. So I chose the thing that made Ruth proud, a trap rather than a shout. I created 3 variants of the sensitive memo, tiny, deliberate edits. One version had a specific number and a phrase that was slightly off the usual cadence. That one went only to Claire. Another version, with a slightly different figure and a unique turn of phrase, went only to Luke. The third version stayed with Tarek and me as the control. Each version looked legitimate, nothing dramatic, just a small numerical tweak and a line that would be noticeable if it leaked. I sent them out with the same professional tone we used for everything. Clean subject line, no flourish, and a request for confirmation that the recipient had received it. Then I waited the way a fisherman waits for a bite, quiet, patient, watching the water, because when the line goes tight, you need to feel it. Within hours, Megan posted a story that quoted the variant only Luke had seen. The number matched. The phrase matched. I screenshot the post, timestamped it, and sent it to Tarek. Caleb sent a photo of Megan's car in a parking lot, this time with a clearer angle and a license plate that matched the lease. Sienna pulled metadata from the post showing when it went live and where it had likely originated. The trap had snapped with the small, undeniable noise of a clock catching on a gear. I didn't want to blow up the family in public. I didn't want to humiliate Dad. I wanted to protect people, so I didn't make the post a media circus. Instead, I gathered the proof, the unique phrases, the screenshots, the timestamps, the car photos, and I arranged them into a packet so clean a judge could have read it and nodded. Precision was the point. Ruth's note, answer cruelty with precision, felt like a warm weight in my pocket. It's a strange thing to plan revenge like a surgeon. You don't get to raise your voice, you get to be careful. You make sure every move lands on what you intend. The trap had worked. Now it was time to decide what to do with the catch. When a bridge is burning, you don't stand on it. I wanted the money to stop where it couldn't be used to burn anyone else. I told Daniel about the memo variants, the timestamps, the car photos. He listened and then acted as a steady hand should. He started a quiet review and agreed to delay any aggressive collections while we stabilized things. He didn't promise to ignore fraud. He promised to give us a clean path if we acted with proof and purpose. I forwarded him the first packet of evidence and a short note: protect the employees and the pension. I'll handle the rest. He replied with a line that made everything feel official: we'll coordinate. Once the money started flowing where it needed to, I turned my attention to the board. Claire had to go not because I wanted revenge on her specifically, but because she had helped hand a rival leverage. I didn't want a messy show vote. I wanted a clean transition that couldn't be used to derail the acquisition. I called 3 directors I trusted, people who'd been in the room when real work happened, and briefed each of them one by one. No grand speeches, no drama. I gave them dates, times, and proof. I showed them the 3 memo variants, the blogger's posts, the timestamped screenshots, and the car photo. I said, she's aligned with someone who wants to sink the deal. We remove her after the acquisition closes. We do it quietly and with a replacement lined up. They asked the sensible questions. What if the rival makes a move? What if Claire makes a spectacle? Who covers her duties? I told them my plan for interim assignments, small teams with clear duties and no single person left holding the phone. We scripted the change with language that sounded boring on purpose. Board transition complete. Sienna drafted that line and saved it as a file labeled hold. It was bureaucracy dressed for peace, and that was exactly what I wanted, the directors agreed. They wanted stability, and when you offer them stability, they take it. Then the family blow-up happened the way family blow-ups always do, close and loud and full of old rules. Dad summoned me to his office with that tight, authoritative voice he thinks will keep everything contained. He started with the phrase I knew all too well. "Are you trying to embarrass me?" I sat across from him and watched how his hands curled around a pen like it was something that had kept him steady his whole life. I answered without raising my voice, "No, I'm trying to protect your people." He looked as if he were trying to process that sentence in an old ledger. "You're disloyal," he said finally, a slow accusation that sounded like a verdict he'd already written. I told him loyalty isn't silence. Loyalty is saying the hard things when they're needed. I said, loyalty is telling the truth when it costs. He stared at me as if he wanted to find the girl who used to sit quietly at the family table and nod. Mom, who calls softly and holds harder, left a message that shook with tears. "Think of family first," she begged. "Think of Luke." I told her I am thinking of family. I'm thinking of the people who show up to work every day and expect a paycheck. She asked me if there was no other way. I told her the pension was on the line and that there wasn't time for sentiment if people's homes were at stake. Luke burst in like a storm, angry, loud, fingers stabbing the air. He accused me of sabotage, of trying to take everything he'd been promised, and he used numbers he shouldn't have known. That's when I knew the trap had bitten. He ranted until his voice ran thin and he left a trail of mess in the room like a storm that had passed through. I didn't gloat. I didn't slam a door. I walked out calm because real change doesn't need theatrical exits. It needs signatures, and I had a pen. Caleb finalized the landing window like a military man rehearses a plan, 6 minutes on the lawn, a clear entry, and an exit route that had contingencies for everything. Omar, the pilot, confirmed fuel, weather, and alternates. He said, "We do this right, we're gone in 6. I liked that precision. It matched how I'd learned to work. Tarek set up the funds release for the Helios acquisition in a way that required my handwritten signature on a paper form. No electronic shortcuts, no at-a-distance boxes checked. It meant I had to be physically present. It meant there was no way someone could pretend the signature hadn't happened. Sienna wrote an embargoed note to trusted reporters. Fact-only language, quiet until the exact moment we needed it. We practiced our timing like a play, every line placed so that no one could improvise a new ending. The plan reached a point where it couldn't be undone without consequences I wasn't willing to live with. I had moved money, lined up the board, and set the acquisition clock. If I walked away now, the work would unravel and people would lose things. If I pushed forward, I'd be the one who had to hold the weight of what happened afterward. I chose to be the one who held it. Before the night that would change where I sat at the table, I made the quietest move I could think of and then sealed it like a small ceremony. I signed a binding letter that made Brightline Harbor the buyer of the family firm, effective when the bank consented. It wasn't grand, it was a neat stack of paper with my name in black ink, a small sentence that meant payrolls would be met and pensions protected. I wrote a private letter to the employees that would send the moment we closed. You are safe. Your work matters. I left the draft with Sienna to send only when the numbers confirmed. I gave Daniel a sealed envelope labeled open if Luke escalates. Inside were screenshots, timestamps, the memo variants, and a short timeline of how the leak had worked. It was the kind of thing that removes wiggle room. He could act, he could call the loan, he could make a move to protect the fund without spectacle. I didn't want police drama or press conferences. I wanted results. An exit for Luke that kept the payroll and the pension intact. I placed Ruth's notes on my dresser and picked one to carry, answer cruelty with precision. It felt heavier than a note and lighter than a weapon. I tucked it into my jacket and slept for 3 hours like someone who had run the last calculations before liftoff. The house was quiet in a way that didn't feel like peace so much as held breath. I woke up with the taste of lemon polish in my mouth from the club I hadn't yet entered and a readiness that felt like a thing you build with routine. The plan couldn't be reversed now. All I had left was to show up and sign where the tabs asked for my name. I set Ruth's card under my napkin on purpose, the one that says build for storms, not sunshine. It steadied me enough to breathe slow. My phone was off the table, face down. One ring would have been enough to crack the moment. Caleb texted me a single word, "Go." Omar, the pilot, was nearby, helmet under his arm like a man who knows how loud the world gets when rotors start. The patio felt small and private until it didn't. When the world opens up, the quiet spots are the first to fill with sound. The helicopter's rotors came like a heart you can hear in your bones. Napkins shivered, the pianist hit a wrong chord, and the room's sound folded toward the lawn. Caleb walked onto the patio with long, sure steps, Omar behind him. He set a leather folder at my plate and said, without looking up, "Signature needed before markets open." The venue manager hovered, pale and flustered, asking about rules, about insurance. He had a script for everything except the fact that the person he expected to be outside was suddenly the center of attention. I opened the folder and ran my finger across the tab where my name waited. The paper smelled faintly of office air and something like ink that doesn't bleed. I signaled for my fountain pen, felt the weight of it, and wrote what needed writing in black ink. I initialed where it asked and slid the page back across the folder without drama. Caleb checked my ID, Omar double-checked the time, and I felt the room through the glass like a living thing. My brother frozen mid-speech, Vanessa's smile flattening, Mom's fingers pinching the bridge of her nose, Dad halfway to his feet and then still. Outside, the heater hummed and a server kept a safe distance, eyes finding the place where the paper closed and the world tilted a little. I stood and said, loud enough for those nearest and for the glass to carry the words to the main table, "I lead Helios Dynamics. I just closed a deal that changes our industry." I watched the faces in the room work to redraw themselves around that fact. I didn't raise my voice beyond the level the room could take. I let the words do the heavy lifting. "I also own the company that owns your firm," I said, and the sentence landed like a stone. People blinked. Conversations that had been rehearsed for weeks stopped midstream. The pianist's wrong chord turned into a held note. "Paying your people on time wasn't a miracle," I told them. "It was management." I felt the air move as if someone had opened a window, servers slowed, forks paused, and for a moment I was a person in a room again, not a role placed on the edge. I finished with a small, precise line, "No more patios for me or for anyone who keeps this place running." The quiet that followed was full of edges. Caleb slid a phone across the table before I could tuck the folder away. Tariq, Sienna, and 3 directors were already on the line. I told them the trap had closed, 3 memo variants, a leaked post that matched the variant Luke had alone seen, photos linking the blogger to someone with access, and timestamps that proved the leak's path. I walked them through it like a technician tracing a circuit. Here's the unique phrase Claire received. Here's the number Luke had. Here are the blog post timestamps. I didn't dramatize. I presented the evidence and left the interpretation to them. The directors were quiet in the way people are when they're choosing between the easy thing and the right thing. I proposed Claire's removal not as an act of vengeance but as damage control. Someone on the board had handed a rival leverage, and that leverage had to be neutralized. I suggested we line up a replacement and script the transition so it could happen cleanly after the acquisition closed. One by one, they asked practical questions. What if Claire pushes back? Who covers her duties, and can we ensure continuity? I had answers ready: interim assignments, short memos, a list of trusted people who could step in without fanfare. They voted quietly, and the answer was yes. No dramatic gavel, no public spat, just a recorded decision to remove a compromised voice from the table. Sienna opened the message labeled Statement A and left it closed. We didn't need the noise. Luke tried to rise to speak, but Dad put out a hand like a captain halting a sailor midship. It was the first time I'd seen him choose silence over spectacle. He sat back down, jaws working, and for a minute he looked like someone who'd lost the script to his life. Vanessa leaned forward with the automatic offer of a public gesture, a family statement, a staged photo, but I let her talk without taking the bait. Mom whispered, "Be reasonable," which is her soft way of asking me to shrink. I answered calmly, "I have been reasonable for years." Investors started texting, small messages of congratulations and questions about integration. Partners replied with terse notes. Confirming go. Alina, my lead engineer, sent a single heart emoji in a team chat. Patty, the server, brought me a small, unexpected cup of coffee. She looked at me, shy and direct, and said, "You did good." It felt like the room had been rearranged and I had chosen where to place myself. The shift was less about taking chairs and more about changing the rules. People who'd always assumed the center belonged to a certain face had to relearn the mechanics of power. Steadiness, accountability, and the willingness to act when others hesitate. I walked back through the glass into the room and felt the warmth differently, like a space that had been smoothed into something new. No one cheered, no one applauded. That's not how this works. The sound was quieter, 100 small acknowledgments in messages and nods and emails that said simply, "We see you." I kept Ruth's card in my pocket and felt the weight of it, the rule inside it that had guided me to this moment. I had chosen where to sit, and the table had finally been set for everyone who kept the lights on. I replied the only way I knew would work, with facts, little and plain. I posted a short thread that said, in clear bullets, what was true: Helios was funded, our partners were aligned, the acquisition was moving forward. No flourish, no drama, just steady lines. Then I recorded a short video message to the staff. I'm not a big speaker in front of cameras, but I looked at the team like people I knew by their coffee orders and their late-night commits. We are funded and focused, I said. Watch me, not rumors. The message landed like a hand on a shoulder for some of them. For others it raised the question, was there more I wasn't saying? Caleb sent me photos he'd taken earlier in the week, still shots of Megan's car in a lot, the license plate angle clear enough to match a lease. He'd cross-checked times and dates and sent them with a short caption, "Found." I didn't blast that on social. I didn't want to stage a public fight that would hurt people who'd done nothing wrong. Instead, I saved the evidence and sent a sealed packet to Daniel Brooks at the bank. I wrote a terse note, "This is the source and the path. We can go public, but I won't. If you want to protect the pension and the employees, use this instead." It felt strategic and humane at once, protect the workers, not the ego. I told Daniel I wouldn't press charges publicly if he could secure a path that kept paychecks flowing and the pension untouched. He launched a formal review and, importantly, he started looking at the loan provisions that tied the pension to the family firm. Within hours, he told me the bank would require changes to the board's authority if it wanted to avoid calling the loan. In plain terms, Luke's role had created risk, and if that risk stayed, the bank might pull the trigger. Jules texted me in the middle of the night, "He's out," and I replied, "He's out of the chair." We keep people paid. That was the distinction that mattered. I wasn't out to ruin a life. I was stopping one man's decisions from wrecking other people's lives. Publicly, we kept the language bland and steady. Sienna released a short line. Leadership transition complete, operations unaffected. It was boring on purpose. Boring doesn't inflate rumors, it reassures people who rely on facts, not drama. Internally, I worked with Daniel to set guardrails. An interim oversight structure at the family firm, a direct hand on payroll and pensions that meant no one could move money without multiple clear approvals. Jules breathed easier, vendors relaxed, the staff didn't get a scandal. They got a quiet change in signatures on the checkbooks. That quiet was its own kind of rescue. The family reaction was messy and human and predictable. Mom called me crying, stunned, and furious in turns. "You ruined your brother's future," she said between sobs. I told her I'd saved his employees' futures. That sentence didn't satisfy her. In Mom's mind, futures come with family names stitched across them. Dad left a voicemail that was brief and flat. "We'll discuss terms." That was his old way of buying time. Vanessa texted again about optics, an idea for a profile piece, a way to soften things with staged photos of me in the trenches. I passed. I don't wear costumes to fix truthful problems. Luke's reaction was a different thing. His texts were furious and frequent, a dark stream that I archived without reading more than the subject line. He called once and yelled into the phone until his breath sounded ragged and raw. I let him finish. There's a moment in a fight where someone finds their worst words and throws them. I didn't respond. Ruth's card in my pocket felt like a brace. Her handwriting said build for storms, and right now everything around me was wind. That steadiness made me answer with decisions, not temper. I didn't have time to brood. Sienna went straight into overdrive, coordinating partners and calming lines that needed calming. Tarek lined up calls with key investors and walked them through the facts, simple language, no spin, just numbers and plans. He scheduled a call that night and took questions with the flat competence that keeps investors awake at night but also trusting. Alina gathered team leads for a talk. I joined for 3 minutes because that's what my people needed. A visible face that said, "You're safe." I told them plainly, "You are safe, keep building, we've covered payroll and the pension." That 3 minutes felt like a salve. Caleb increased security shifts. No surprises, no unknown people near our offices or our houses. He stayed visible in the halls in a way that made people feel seen and not watched. The bank issued a quiet letter recognizing the new oversight and agreeing not to pull the plug while they reviewed the evidence. It was the kind of slow, bureaucratic thing that means the difference between panic and continuity. Payroll cleared on schedule. The relief was low and human and smelled like someone finally turning on a lamp after a blackout. We were upright again, and upright is a fragile, precious state. Victor Lang, the rival, tried to regroup quickly. He floated a new line to our mutual partners. Perhaps a friendly partnership might be cleaner, a way of implying Helios might be for sale if the board was weak. Sienna answered once on our channels, "We're not for sale, we're focused." Then she let silence do the rest of the work. Claire's allies resized into the background. People who value stability over drama started shifting away from noisy alliances. One vendor, cornered by fear, demanded early payment or threatened to talk. I paid the invoice to keep a roof service running that would have caused a costly interruption, and then quietly cut that vendor loose later for the principle of keeping reliable partners. It's strange how these things prune themselves. When you offer steady hands and quick payments, friends show up and enemies retreat. We rewarded good faith and made sure threats didn't find a purchase point. The acquisition's first integration call ran on time and ended early, which is the sort of result that makes your team smile quietly. People prefer work that finishes on time to drama that finishes on headlines. The small victories stacked, teams aligned, engineers focused, invoices paid, and that quiet pulse is the real power you wield when the spectacle fades. Brightline Harbor's sister company, Sunville Point, began a quiet approach to the club lender, the way you make a soft offer no one notices at first. We didn't go straight for headlines. We asked questions, we read bylaws, and we found a clause that favored a buyer who could assume certain debts quickly. That clause was a lever. Tarek lined up a letter of funds and I arranged a small team of advisors who understood how to move fast and small. We kept the circle tiny, me, Tarek, Caleb, and the broker, because too many cooks make noise and noise invites resistance. The club's board bristled. Miles ramped up the pressure with letters and a few pointed calls to people he assumed would back him. He framed it as protecting tradition. Tradition is a neat word when you want to keep things in place. I called Patty, the server who'd seen me on that patio, and asked about staff. "They love this place," she said. "They don't want rules to hurt them." That was my exact point. I wasn't buying status. I was buying a safe space for people who worked there and for the club's staff who relied on schedules and tips and steady pay. When the lender asked for proof of funds within 24 hours, my stomach tightened in the way it does before a run. Tarek delivered the letter, clean and clear. Sienna drafted a calm statement, no gloating, no showboating, only plain facts if the bid went public. Miles threatened lawsuits in a tone that suggested he expected me to back down. I'd learned that people use big words to scare you into silence. I was done being silent. If the club board wanted to make rules about who gets to sit where, I was going to buy the right to change those rules. The personal cost of what I'd done was a quiet ledger I carried around in my head. I slept in short stretches and woke with my jaw clenched. The house felt too empty some nights, like a stage after the lights come down. I found a birthday card from Ruth tucked into a drawer, her handwriting like a small piano key. "Proud of you," she'd written on the inside, the kind of plain sentence that makes your throat tighten. I wanted Dad to say that more than I wanted it to be true. I thought revenge would feel like a release, but it's more like closing a door that keeps some light out. There are small aches that come with doing what's right when it hurts family. Mom called and cried on the line, and her voice sounded older because she'd been carrying the weight of the family's image for years. She asked me if I'd considered how this would look and if I'd thought about Luke's future. I told her I'd thought about the receptionist's canceled vacation more than any title. That answer didn't land well. Dad's silence came in a flat message. "We'll discuss terms." It wasn't a blessing so much as a postponement. Vanessa kept pitching me photo shoots and staged reconciliation ideas like slapping gloss over a bruise. I refused. There's a cost to drawing lines, and I accepted mine. Family would be complicated for a while. I didn't take the cost lightly. I ran 3 miles in the rain one morning because the cold water and pounding pavement scrubbed the edges off whatever resentment I had left. I drank terrible hotel coffee and laughed at a joke Alina sent in the team chat. I held tight to Ruth's writing and wrote my own short rules on a sticky note. Protect the workers, avoid public shaming, keep things clean. Those lines kept me steady. The work itself, emails, calls, the steady flow of operations, helped me forget the ache for a moment. There's a bitter, practical comfort to fixing what you can. Tying off loose ends became a series of small, efficient acts. I ordered internal audits at the family firm and found more padding in reports, numbers smoothed to make things look better than they were. I corrected them and set a new standard. Plain facts only. Jules got a raise and a locked drawer because she'd been the one who'd told me about payroll and then done what she could to hold the place together. She deserved recognition and security. I assigned an interim lead for operations, a calm person who writes short, clear instructions and doesn't make a scene. I asked the HR director to rewrite policies so that no single person could move money without multiple checks. I wanted systems that outlived any one person's ego. Claire's removal paperwork completed without spectacle. Her laptop and access were collected like the end of a job, not a slapstick performance. I made sure the handover was plain. Here are the keys, here's who will manage your duties. No one needed drama, we needed continuity. Victor's last whisper as a rival started to fade because product milestones were met and customers signed on. The board sent a short thank you note and then got to work. I filed the note and moved on. The point wasn't to gloat, it was to put things right. Sunville Point's approach to the club lender hit a snag when a competing bidder appeared. They were connected to Miles and willing to offer more time and sweeter words. The lender, however, said they'd take certainty over charm. They asked for proof of funds and an agreement to keep staff employed. Tarek lined up the funds letter and I signed a commitment to maintain the staff. Sienna prepared the same calm statement, no gloating. The clause I'd found in the bylaws meant the lender favored a buyer who could move fast. I moved. The competing bidder tried to buy time and atmosphere. I bought speed and certainty. That choice tightened something at home. Dad called and said he'd publicly oppose any move that embarrassed him. Mom begged me to fix Luke's reputation. Vanessa proposed a joint television sit-down and expensive performative healing session. I declined. I asked them instead to meet me for coffee under the club's string lights in a week. No cameras, no handlers, just the four of us. Dad said, "You don't run this family." I answered, "No one should. We should run our responsibilities." It's a sentence that sounds small until you realize what it means. You can't expect the brand to protect people if you won't protect the people. The lender sent a tight deadline, proof or lose the window. I signed documents for Sunville Point in a cramped conference room and felt the odd mix of exhaustion and relief. It was a clean stack of paper with a number and a promise to keep staff. I emailed Miles with a brief note, "Looking forward to working together. We'll take good care of this place." I added one line about seating. No patios assigned by status ever. It was a small policy buried in a big acquisition, but I wanted the rule to be clear. There was no cheer, no confetti. I felt instead a quiet satisfaction, the way you feel when you finish a long, exacting job. The final line I wrote on the documents felt heavier than ink. I'd bought the room where I had once been told to sit outside. Walking out of the meeting room, the exhaustion hit like a wave. It's the kind of tired that comes from carrying other people's sleep, from being awake to their worries. I felt a quiet pride, the small kind that doesn't demand applause. There are costs you accept because the alternative is worse: people without pensions, houses without heat. I thought about how many times I'd sat on a fringe while others crafted the picture. Signing those papers meant I'd bought the room where people ate, laughed, and sometimes worried. It also meant there were people who would be furious, people who would feel betrayed, and that was a weight I'd decided to carry. I started making the changes that would hold beyond one conversation. The first rule went up on the club notice board: no guest is seated outside for status. Patios are by choice only. I pushed a heater to the center of the main dining area so warmth was shared, not hoarded. Patty walked the dining room with me, her steps quiet in shoes smoothed by years of carrying plates. We talked about the staff's schedules, the bussers who worked 2 jobs, the bartender whose kids needed after-school care. I set a 60-day review to raise wages if revenue stayed on track, and I asked the general manager to schedule a meeting where the staff could tell me what they needed. Miles complained, wrote letters, and made calls that sounded like history lessons about tradition. Tradition, as he meant it, prioritized image over people. My counter was simple and blunt: people first, rules second. The dining room smelled like lemon polish the night I walked it with Patty. I found old menus in the back that said the club was about community, not heirs. I moved one heater and watched the center table bloom with warmth in a way that made sense to me. Small gestures can change daily life. Miles fumed and sent emails. His indignation felt like a map of old money trying to redraw the lines. Contracts talk louder than complaints, though, and when the papers hit the right desks, his letters looked a lot like noise. The staff thanked me quietly, without stagecraft, Patty with a hand to her chest, the chef with a nod. That was the new applause I wanted. I invited Mom, Dad, Luke, and Vanessa to meet me under the string lights outside the club. No photographers, no handlers, no headlines. I wanted them to see the room as I saw it now, warm, open, and on terms that didn't demand performance. Mom arrived early and looked smaller somehow without an audience to play to. She must have rehearsed what she would say 100 times the way she does before a family event, because when she sat, she didn't know what to do with her hands. Dad walked in reliable and stiff, the kind of posture he thinks holds decisions steady. Luke hung back near the edge like he expected to be stopped. Vanessa arranged herself with a practiced smile that looked automatic. I chose the seat in the center and pulled out 2 chairs for Mom and Dad. For a good minute, I said nothing. We listened to cicadas and the distant hum of the club, the string lights throwing soft halos across small faces. There were no speeches, no accusations to be polished and set on a table to declaim. I told them calmly that I had no interest in humiliating anyone and that I wouldn't let anyone humiliate others in private. The words landed with more force than any argument I could have made in the heat of the fight. Mom's eyes went wet, Dad's jaw loosened slightly, and Luke's expression shifted from defiance to something less certain. We ate small plates and did not orchestrate toasts. There was a rhythm to the meal that felt honest, an unglamorous human thing. I told them what I'd done, not to gloat, but because truth had to be plain. I said I'd bought the club to protect the staff and to change one little rule. No more patios assigned by status. I watched the way the light moved over their faces, how Vanessa's smile faltered when it wasn't followed by a camera, how Luke's fingers twitched once before he stilled. It wasn't reconciliation in any cinematic sense, it was a beginning and a test. I left the space open for them to choose how they would meet me in it. After they left, the room inside the club felt smaller because I had once been its edge. I walked to the patio table where I had been parked for years and set Ruth's top card under a clean plate. The ink on her note was smudged at the corner, an old habit, a sign she'd pressed hard when a line mattered. The string lights hummed above and the lawn lay dark beyond them. I asked Patty to start a scholarship for staff kids in a name that wouldn't be mine. She nodded, tears in her eyes, and the idea took shape like bread rising. I wanted the thing to be about them, not me, quiet and steady. I sat for a long moment in the chair I had once been told to vacate and then rose to stand where the center heater warms everyone equally. I picked up my fountain pen and felt its weight in my hand, the same small instrument that had signed documents that kept people's lives intact. I slipped the pen into my pocket and said to nobody in particular, stormproof. Finally, the patio heater clicked off with a soft mechanical sigh as if the room exhaled too. I walked inside with my shoulders back in a new way, less armor, more work. If you've ever been kept out of the frame by family or felt pushed to the edge when you should have been at the center, tell me where you're listening from in the comments. Subscribe and turn on notifications for more first-person revenge stories. There's always another table to set.